People like Elijah Whitmore don't just wake up rich. They wake up buffered from consequences, from discomfort, from the word no. From the outside, Elijah's life looked like a polished magazine spread. Glass towers reflecting the sky, a last name that opened doors before he knocked, and a net worth that quietly rewrote rules wherever he stepped. He was the kind of man whose presence rearranged rooms without effort. And yet, if you had watched him closely that morning, standing alone in a penthouse kitchen that cost more than most neighborhoods, you would have noticed something unsettling. He wasn't smiling. He was staring out at a city that adored him, wondering why it all felt so empty. Now, let me introduce the contrast. Amara Collins started her mornings differently. No skyline views, no silence, just the hum of a crowded bus, the weight of responsibility already pressing into her shoulders before the day even began. She dressed with intention, not vanity, muted colors, sharp lines, nothing that begged to be misunderstood. Because women like Amara learned early that visibility was a risk, especially in spaces funded by people who never had to explain themselves. And yet, somehow, both of their paths were heading toward the same building that morning. The Whitmore Foundation rose like a monument to generosity. Marble floors, curated diversity posters, mission statements etched into glass. To the world, it was proof that wealth could be compassionate. To Elijah, it was legacy maintenance. To Amara, it was an opportunity wrapped in pressure. She knew what it meant to work in rooms where power smiled politely while quietly deciding who belonged. Then came the moment neither of them would forget. A boardroom, a presentation, numbers flashing on a screen no one questioned until Amara did. Her voice didn't shake when she spoke, but the air changed the second she did. She pointed out a flaw that threatened the Foundation's narrative, not loudly, not defiantly, just truthfully. Heads turned, pens stopped moving. People glanced at Elijah, waiting to see if he'd shut her down. Instead, he looked at her, really looked. And for the first time in years, something cracked beneath his certainty. You see, in that single exchange, two worlds brushed against each other, one built on inherited power, the other on earned resilience. Neither of them knew it yet, but that moment had just set something dangerous in motion. Because when wealth notices honesty and honesty refuses to shrink, someone always feels threatened. So here's the question I want you to sit with before the story continues. When power finally sees you, does it elevate you or decide to erase you? Let me tell you something most people don't realize about power. It announces itself long before it speaks. When Elijah Whitmore walked into that conference room, the room shifted. Chairs straightened. Conversations died mid-sentence. Even the air seemed to wait for permission to move. This wasn't arrogance, it was conditioning. People had learned, over years and careers, that proximity to a Whitmore meant proximity to opportunity. And opportunity made people quiet. Amara noticed it immediately. She was seated near the end of the table, notebook already open, pen resting lightly between her fingers. She had arrived early, not because she was eager, but because being late in rooms like this came with assumptions she couldn't afford. As Elijah took his seat at the head of the table, she watched him the way you watch the weather when you've lived through storms before. Carefully, without admiration, without fear. The meeting began like all the others, polished slides, confident voices, impact metrics designed to impress donors who would never visit the neighborhoods being discussed. Elijah listened with half attention, his mind drifting the way it always did during foundation briefings. He'd seen these numbers before, approved them before, believed them because believing was easier than questioning. Until Amara spoke. She didn't interrupt. She waited. And that, oddly enough, is what made everyone uncomfortable. When she finally raised her hand, a few heads turned, more out of surprise than interest. Junior staff didn't usually slow meetings like this, especially not women who looked like her. I just want to clarify something, she said, her voice steady, respectful. The outreach projections assume equal access to broadband across all target areas. But that's not accurate. We're overestimating impact by a significant margin. The room went still. Someone cleared their throat. Another person smiled tightly, the kind of smile meant to smooth things over without addressing them. The presenter glanced at Elijah, silently asking, "Should we shut this down?" But Elijah didn't speak. He was looking at Amara, not because she was challenging him, but because she wasn't afraid to. "Can you explain?" he asked. That single sentence changed the temperature of the room. Amara met his eyes. No flinching, no performance. She walked them through the data calmly, pointing out blind spots most people in the room had never experienced personally. Not accusing, not emotional, just precise. Elijah felt something unfamiliar stir beneath his composure. Curiosity. After the meeting, he found himself lingering. Another thing he rarely did. People filtered out, throwing Amara curious glances as they passed. Some impressed, others wary. She packed her things methodically, already bracing herself for the consequences of speaking up. Elijah approached her casually, hands in his pockets. "You were right," he said. She looked up, surprised, not by the words, but by the lack of condescension. "Thank you. Where did you learn to analyze systems like that?" he asked. Amara hesitated, not because she didn't have an answer, but because she learned to be careful about how much of herself she revealed in powerful spaces. "Experience," she said simply. He smiled, not the polished public smile he gave investors, but something quieter, realer. That was the moment the line blurred. They began running into each other more often after that. Not accidentally, though it felt that way at first. Brief check-ins turned into longer conversations. Conversations turned into debates. Debates turned into laughter neither of them expected. But underneath it all was something unspoken. Elijah noticed the way Amara chose her words carefully when talking about community. The way she corrected people without embarrassing them. The way she carried herself. Not deferential, but not careless either. He admired it without fully understanding why. Amara, on the other hand, noticed things she'd been trained to notice. The way people softened when Elijah entered a room. The way his mistakes were reframed as bold risks. The way he could speak bluntly and still be called visionary, while she measured every sentence, knowing one wrong tone could brand her as difficult. Once, during a late evening briefing, Elijah joked, "You're the smartest person in the room." Amara smiled politely. "That depends on who's allowed to be wrong." He laughed, then stopped, because he realized she wasn't joking. That was the tension between them. Not an attraction yet, not romance, but awareness. The kind that makes people uneasy because it exposes imbalance without naming it. Still, curiosity has a way of ignoring warnings. As they walked out of the building that night, Elijah glanced at her and asked almost casually, "Would you want to grab dinner sometime?" No work, just conversation. Amara paused. She looked at him, not at his suit, not at his last name, but at the man standing there, unaware of how dangerous that question already was. "Maybe," she said. And as they parted ways under the city lights, neither of them realized they had just crossed into a story where curiosity wouldn't be forgiven and chemistry would come at a cost. Because when power leans in close, it's rarely just to listen. So tell me, when interest starts to feel personal, is it connection or the beginning of control? If stories like this matter, comment and subscribe to Melanin Chronicles. Because up until now, what Elijah and Amara had lived in was a possibility. Curiosity. The fragile illusion that connection could exist without consequence. But the world has a way of reminding you who it was built for. And it never whispers that reminder. It clears its throat first. It started subtly. Always does. Amara noticed it in the way conversations paused when she entered rooms she'd been invited into just weeks earlier. In the way colleagues who once sought her input now framed their questions like tests. "Are you sure? Maybe we should run that by someone senior." Compliments began arriving with qualifiers: articulate, surprisingly strategic, so grounded. Words that sounded kind until you recognized them as fences. Elijah noticed it too, though differently. He noticed the raised eyebrows when he asked for Amara's presence in high-level meetings. The jokes masked as concern. Careful, optics matter. People might misunderstand. One board member even laughed and said, "You're getting very progressive lately." Elijah laughed along. Amara didn't. The first overt sign came disguised as professionalism. An email from HR. A routine disclosure reminder about workplace relationships. The language was neutral, but the subtext was sharp. Your proximity must not compromise institutional integrity. Amara read it twice, feeling the familiar tightening in her chest. This wasn't policy, it was positioning. Then came the foundation gala. Amara stood beside Elijah in a midnight blue dress she'd chosen carefully. Elegant, restrained, unimpeachable. She was introduced not by name, but by role. She works with us. No title, no acknowledgement of her expertise, just proximity. A donor leaned in and whispered, "It's wonderful how committed the foundation is to representation." Amara smiled. Later that night, a woman approached her at the bar. "You must feel so lucky," she said, eyes flicking toward Elijah. "Opportunities like this don't come around often for everyone." Amara's hand tightened around her glass. That was the moment she realized something painful. To them, she wasn't with Elijah. She was benefiting from him. And in their minds, benefits always came with expiration dates. The Whitmore family didn't confront her directly. They didn't need to. Their influence moved faster than words. Her projects were reassigned temporarily. Her access to decision-making narrowed. She was praised publicly and sidelined privately. Meanwhile, Elijah was advised, softly, repeatedly, that he should protect himself. "People talk," his uncle said over lunch. "You're too important to be distracted." Distracted by a woman whose work had corrected their data, by a voice that refused to shrink. The town noticed too. Paparazzi photos surfaced, not scandalous, just intimate enough to provoke commentary. Headlines danced around implication without accusation. Billionaire philanthropist seen with foundation staffer. Comment sections did the rest. Gold digger. Plant. Diversity hire. Agenda. Elijah tried to shield her, but protection is different when one person holds the umbrella and the other stands in the rain. Amara felt the imbalance everywhere. She noticed how Elijah could be angry and still be called passionate, how she had to remain composed or risk being labeled aggressive. She noticed how his mistakes were softened by legacy, while her excellence was treated like an anomaly. One night, after another quiet dinner interrupted by stares, she finally said it. "This costs me more than it costs you." Elijah didn't argue. He couldn't, because power had finally revealed its terms. It wasn't just the family anymore. It was the system, the company, the town that smiled at Elijah and watched Amara with suspicion. The unspoken rule that said love was acceptable as long as it didn't threaten hierarchy. And here's the cruelest part. No one ever said race out loud. They didn't have to. It lived in tone, in access, in silence, in the way doors closed quietly instead of slamming shut. Amara began to understand something deeper than hostility. This wasn't personal. It was structural. And structures don't negotiate with feelings. By the end of that month, the message was clear. Elijah could keep everything: his name, his empire, his protection. Amara could keep her dignity, but she couldn't keep both. So tell me, when love exposes an imbalance this deep, do you fight the system or do you become its next casualty? If you've ever wondered how power really works, this is where you pay attention. Because power doesn't always crush you head on. Sometimes it convinces you to step out of the way and then tells the world you fell. The first lie arrived wrapped in concern. Elijah was called into a private meeting with the board. No agenda, no assistants, just family and a few senior executives who'd known him since childhood. They spoke softly, carefully, like doctors delivering bad news. "We're worried about Amara," his mother said, folding her hands. "She's under a lot of pressure. The media attention, the rumors. It's not healthy." Elijah frowned. "She's handling it." His uncle leaned forward. "Is she? Or is she using it?" That word landed heavier than any accusation so far. They slid documents across the table, emails, expense reports, and selectively highlighted messages taken wildly out of context. Nothing illegal, nothing provable, just enough suggestion to seed doubt. "We've had concerns about her boundaries," his mother continued, "about her motivations." Elijah felt something cold crawl up his spine. At the same time, unknown to him, Amara was being summoned elsewhere. HR, legal, compliance. The tone had changed. She was no longer being advised. She was being investigated. They accused her of leaking information to the press, of manipulating Elijah for influence, of violating ethics clauses she'd never even been trained on. When she denied it, calmly and clearly, they nodded sympathetically as if denial was expected. "We just need cooperation," the lawyer said. "If you're innocent, this will clear everything up." But here's the thing about systems like this. They don't investigate to find the truth. They investigate to construct it. Amara started noticing the setup too late. Her work email access was restricted. Her calendar was mysteriously wiped. Meetings she'd been scheduled for were suddenly rescheduled indefinitely. When she asked questions, responses came slower, colder. Then the article dropped. Not a headline, a leak. An anonymous source alleged that a senior staffer had been feeding internal foundation data to activist journalists in exchange for protection, while romantically involved with the CEO. No name was printed. They didn't need one. Amara's phone exploded. Friends asked if she was okay. Colleagues asked if it was true. Strangers sending messages that alternated between hatred and mockery. By the time Elijah called her, panicked, confused, the narrative had already taken root. She met him that night, exhausted but composed. "They're framing me," she said simply. Elijah wanted to believe her. He did. But belief becomes complicated when doubt has been professionally engineered. "I just need time," he said. "Let me talk to them. Let me fix this. Fix this." Amara studied his face and saw something that hurt more than the accusations. Hesitation. That's when the real enemy came into focus. Not just his family, not just the foundation, but the illusion that love could outrun hierarchy. The final manipulation came disguised as mercy. Amara was offered a deal. No charges, no public naming, a generous severance, a non-disclosure agreement thicker than a phone book. In exchange, she would quietly resign and pursue opportunities elsewhere. "It protects everyone," the attorney said, including Elijah. That was the sentence that cracked her open, because suddenly she understood. This wasn't about punishing her. It was about protecting the system from her truth. Elijah, meanwhile, was given his own version of the deal. If he distanced himself publicly, decisively, the board would resolve the issue. The scandal would fade. His reputation would remain intact. The family would stand behind him again. He was told this was leadership. Amara was told this was dignity. They were both being managed. The emotional peak didn't come with screaming or confrontation. It came in silence. Amara packed her office alone. No goodbye emails. No acknowledgement. Just the quiet erasure of a woman who dared to speak clearly in rooms that preferred echoes. Elijah watched from his glass office as she walked out. And here's the twist most people don't expect. She didn't cry, because somewhere between the lie and the offer, Amara had decided on her own. If they wanted her quiet, they had gravely misunderstood her. She didn't sign the agreement. She memorized it. And as she stepped into the elevator, career burned, reputation bruised, love compromised, she wasn't thinking about revenge. She was thinking about receipts. Because when power lies this carefully, it means it's afraid of what the truth could do. So tell me this, when the system betrays you to protect itself, do you disappear quietly? Or do you come back with evidence? Let me tell you what resilience really looks like, because it doesn't always arrive with applause. Sometimes it shows up quietly when no one is watching and dares you to stand on nothing but your own spine. Amara disappeared from the foundation the way systems prefer people like her to disappear. Silently, with no public acknowledgement of her work. Just an internal memo announcing her departure, and a subtle rewriting of history that suggested she had never mattered as much as she did. But here's what power didn't anticipate. Amara didn't run. She regrouped. She moved back into a smaller apartment, cut expenses, and rebuilt her days with intention. Mornings that once began with boardrooms now began with research. Nights once spent navigating coded hostility were spent organizing documents, timelines, and patterns. She replayed conversations she'd been told to forget. Cross-checked emails they thought she'd lost access to. Screenshots, calendar logs, policy gaps. This wasn't rage. This was clarity. For the first time since the war began, Amara wasn't reacting. She was choosing. And the choice was simple, though not easy. Dignity over dependence. Truth over proximity. Herself over the illusion of safety. Meanwhile, Elijah Whitmore was learning what comfort actually cost. The scandal never fully went away. It hovered, contained but unresolved. Board members smiled again, but the warmth was conditional. His family welcomed him back into their tight inner circle, but something fundamental had shifted. He'd seen the machinery up close now. He knew how easily truth was bent to preserve image. He tried to call Amara. At first it rang, then it didn't. He told himself she needed space, that he was giving her time. But late at night, alone in the same penthouse that once symbolized success, Elijah felt the weight of a question he'd been avoiding. Had he chosen comfort or cowardice? The answer arrived in pieces. A journalist reached out, then another. Questions he couldn't answer cleanly. Gaps he couldn't explain without exposing the lie. The Foundation's lawyers urged restraint, silence, strategic distance. This will pass, his mother assured him. It always does. But Elijah had begun to understand something Amara already knew. Silence isn't neutral. It's a side. The truth came out the way truths always do when they're patient. Not in a dramatic press conference, not in a viral meltdown, but in a meticulously sourced investigation that landed one quiet Tuesday morning. It traced patterns, named practices, exposed how nonprofits were weaponized for reputation laundering, how whistleblowers were reframed as liabilities, how Black excellence was welcomed only when it didn't challenge control. Amara's name appeared, not as an accusation, but as a through line. Her voice wasn't angry. It was factual, unshakable, educated. She didn't accuse Elijah. She didn't need to. The story did that on its own. By noon, the board was in crisis mode. By evening, donors were calling for answers. The family scrambled, not to deny, but to contain, to sacrifice lesser names to protect bigger ones. Elijah read the article alone, line by line, and for the first time, he understood the full cost of the world he'd inherited. The next morning, he made his choice. Not publicly, not performatively, but irrevocably. He stepped down from operational leadership of the foundation and refused the scripted statement prepared for him. He didn't expose everything, but he didn't protect it either. He walked away from comfort without knowing what courage would replace it. Amara watched it all unfold from a distance. No satisfaction, no triumph, just a quiet exhale. Because resilience isn't about watching your enemies fall. It's about refusing to fall with them. Still, the story wasn't over. Because systems don't forgive exposure, and power doesn't forget defiance. So now I ask you this. When truth finally surfaces, who survives what comes next? Let me be honest with you. This was never going to end like a fairy tale. There would be no slow motion reunion under perfect lighting. No triumphant kiss that magically erased systems older than both of them. Because real power doesn't collapse neatly, and real healing doesn't arrive on cue. What happened next was quieter than victory, but far more honest. Amara didn't become famous overnight. She didn't get crowned a hero, or handed a seat at the same tables that once pushed her out. What she got instead was something more durable: agency. Invitations came, yes, but this time on her terms. Universities, independent boards, community-backed ventures that didn't need to borrow legitimacy from legacy names. She spoke about governance, about ethics, about how institutions learn to weaponize politeness. And every time she told the story, she told it without bitterness, because bitterness would have kept her tied to them. Elijah's life unraveled differently. Walking away didn't make him brave in the public eye. It made him confused. Some called him principled. Others called him reckless. His family called it a phase. The truth sat somewhere lonelier. He lost access before he lost money. Lost certainty before he lost comfort. Rooms he once owned now felt transactional. People measured him, recalibrated him, waited to see if he'd return to form. And that, oddly enough, cost him more than he expected. They met once more, months later, in a city that didn't belong to either of them. No secrecy, no audience, just two people shaped by the same storm in different ways. They talked about nothing dramatic at first. Life, work, sleep schedules, the world as it was now. Then Elijah said the thing he'd rehearsed 100 times and still didn't get right. I thought stepping back was enough. Amara nodded, not unkindly. Stepping back is where most people stop, she said. Stepping out is harder. They didn't rekindle anything that night. Because resolution isn't always a reunion. Sometimes it's recognition. They left with respect intact, and that mattered more than romance ever could. What they shared had been real, but it had also been asymmetrical. And naming that truth was part of the ending. Here's what the story doesn't show you in headlines. Amara still had to be excellent to be heard. Still had to explain things that others were praised for intuiting. Still had to walk into rooms already preloaded with doubt. But now, she walked in unafraid of losing access because she no longer built her worth around it. That's the shift. Power didn't disappear. It just lost its grip on her identity. Elijah learned something too. Something wealth had delayed, but not prevented. That neutrality is a luxury, and silence is never empty. He learned that loving someone harmed by a system means confronting the system, not just feeling bad about it. And that choosing courage once doesn't make you courageous forever. It makes you responsible. So no, this wasn't a fairy tale, but it was empowering because it told the truth most stories avoid. That dignity is louder than proximity. That resilience isn't about endurance, it's about refusal. That sometimes the bravest ending is not staying, not fighting, not winning, but walking away with your voice intact. And now I'll leave you with this reflection, because stories like this don't end when the video does. When you see someone being pushed out quietly, ask yourself who benefits from the silence. When love becomes inconvenient, ask who set the terms. And when power offers protection at the price of truth, ask what it's really afraid of. If this story made you pause, think, or see something differently, drop a comment. Let's talk about it. And if you want more stories about power, race, resilience, and the courage it takes to choose yourself, subscribe to Melanin Chronicles. Because some endings aren't about getting everything back. They're about finally knowing what was never worth losing.